Welcome to a Healthy Push podcast. I'm Shannon Jackson, former anxiety sufferer turned adventure mom and anxiety recovery coach. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. And now I help people to push past the stuff that I used to struggle with. Each week, I'll be sharing real and honest conversations along with actionable and practical steps that you can take to help you push past your anxious thoughts, the symptoms, panic, and fears. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. All right, today I am getting to have a conversation I've been wanting to have for a while, and I feel like I found the perfect person to have this chat with. So I have Amber Trejo with me. She is an integrative trauma therapist and coach and specializes in childhood trauma. So, Amber, I'm very excited to have you here. Welcome to a Healthy Push podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been wanting to have I know we've been trying to have this conversation for a little while. We've been like missing each other. And so I'm so excited. I've been listening to your podcast and first of all, I love the sound of your voice and I'm really excited. I think it's going to be great.
Oh my goodness, thank you. So many people tell me that. Like, I love the sound of your voice. And right now I'm sick, so it does not sound the usual, but that's okay. But people tell me that. I'm like, I used to have such a complex about it because I feel like I have a more like little kid voice. But people are like, no, it's so calming. I love it. I'm like, great,
Yeah.
great.
It's so soothing when I was listening because I was like, you know what, I'm going to listen to a couple episodes and just like, see what it sounds like and everything. And I was just like, oh, this is going to be great. Just her voice gets me into my like regulated nervous system. So,
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. So let's start with just more basic. Like, I think some of us are kind of walking around knowing like there was some childhood trauma there. Some of us are walking around, I think, like, I don't really think so. I think everything was pretty good. And some people are like, yeah, no, I had a great childhood. Things were good, things felt good, felt regulated, learned a lot of the things that I felt I needed to learn. So let's just talk about what can childhood trauma look like? Because I think for some people, especially people in the middle, like, I don't know, it's not always clear, right? Like what that can look like. So can you just describe a little bit of how it can present?
Yes, that's a great question because I think it is such a spectrum. And I think that there are so many things that actually are inherently traumatic in different environments that a lot of people don't recognize as childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so, since becoming a trauma therapist and working with so many different kinds of people who were like, coming into my office and just being like, listen, I had a great childhood. I just don't remember a lot of it. Or I had a great childhood. I just remember I couldn't express, at a very young age to my parents what I was feeling inside because that wasn't safe. Right. So I think where I want to go with this is it can look like a lot of different things. And so I talk a lot about my own specific trauma. My childhood trauma was very much what you would think of childhood trauma to be. So I grew up with a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, and my father left when I was really young. My mother struggled with alcoholism. And so I think that is kind of the picture that a lot of people think of when they think of childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Or somebody who grew up in a foster care system, was in and out of the system. That, of course, very traumatizing. And you have explicit memories of it. So explicit memories are really those memories that we have where we can remember the specific event. Like this happened and this was horrible for me. So that is one way that trauma can look. That's what people think of when they hear childhood trauma. I'm going to give you two more instances that I feel like are super traumatizing for people that I don't think they recognize at all as being trauma. Okay. So the two main ones that I work with that don't believe that they had childhood trauma are people who grew up in a nuclear family system. So maybe their parents stayed married. They had both parents in the home. And so their family system was very much like, we don't talk about our feelings. Mm-hmm. So that's what I refer to as rigid boundaries. There's a lot of boundaries around, we don't talk about that. So
Yep.
this would be a person who grew up in a family system who maybe you guys had amazing holidays. Maybe your mom was in the kitchen all the time cooking amazing dinners. And so you're not thinking of your life as traumatizing. You're not thinking I had childhood trauma, and if you were to go out and be like, "Oh, I had childhood trauma," people would probably be like, "What? Okay. No,
Yeah.
you didn't." Right?
Yeah. I
Be really
oh,
invalidating towards it.
right. I'm so glad that you said that. I think like, our age group, I'm thinking of all the 70s, 80s, even probably 90s kids who were like, yeah, my childhood was great. Like you're saying, my parents were together. Things are seemingly good. We went on trips, we had fun, but we never went there with emotions. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
true for so many people.
Yeah, so you learned at a very young age. It's not safe to cry about something. It's not safe to be vulnerable about something. So maybe you had a parent who was even like really sarcastic or joked around with you a lot, but you grew up with this feeling of I actually can't let my guard down. I can't share these vulnerable things with my family system.
Mm,
So the reason why that is so traumatizing is because a big part of trauma is not the actual event that happens to us, but the whether or not we have to go through it alone.
mm,
So children who grow up in those households where it's like we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about the hard things that we're going through, they end up carrying so many different things completely on their own. So now you have like maybe a child that's already learned these that you don't talk about these things at the age of like 5 or 6. They go to school and someone's making fun of them
mm,
and they're left to hold this on their own. Maybe they go home and they try to tell their parent, I'm really upset. I'm really sad. And they're like, don't be sad. Who cares if someone's bullying you?
mm.
Right. And I'm not saying that that for sure is going to give somebody that specific incident for sure is going to give somebody childhood trauma, but it's the reoccurrence of it's not safe for me to share my emotions with my family system and to kind of unload them. So children should be able to kind of let go of those things. Like, I'm feeling this weird way, or I'm scared about this. And they let go of that and they give it to their primary caregiver. And then their primary caregiver holds space for it.
Yeah.
And then you could go through a lot of different things and it not necessarily be traumatizing to your body.
Yeah.
But when you have to carry it alone. So I think that that is one big one that a lot of people don't quite they grow up and they don't understand why they're having these symptoms or something, and yet they recognize they can't be vulnerable with many people, they can't get close to people, they don't feel like they can be their authentic selves with other people.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding my head. I mean, I had definitely childhood trauma and more of what people might think of as childhood trauma, but I definitely had this feeling as a kid I was so sensitive and I was walking around with a ton of anxiety. And my mom was aware. My dad was just very emotionally checked out, not really present. But even my mom, like now as an adult, she'll say, I feel so bad because I didn't talk to you about it. I didn't even know how to approach it. I didn't even know to the extent that it was going on. And I think, of course, that's, how she was raised. And it's so hard when you do have, like, I had a loving parent, right? My mom was amazing, but she didn't have those skills to be able to talk to me and my brother about big emotions. So yeah, there was such a gap, right? And I think this is true for so many people, and I never really recognized that, right, until later in life.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up that you were a highly sensitive and very anxious child because I'm thinking of my middle son right now and he is highly sensitive and he is very, very anxious.
Mm,
And such a big part of working through his anxiety has been me just holding space for his anxiety
yeah,
and not actually jumping into fix it, which was a really, really, and is
yeah,
still super hard for me because of going through trauma. So I'm like, I need to fix this. Like,
yeah,
this is not going to work. Right.
yeah,
But what I recognized was like, sometimes he just would need to come to me and cry before school and say, I don't want to go to school. I'm scared. And I just needed to sit there with him and say, yeah, okay. Like, and he just needed to unload that on me.
yeah,
Then he'd, go run out, hop on the bus, come home happy as a clam, be fine. But he needed to let go of that anxiety and express that he was feeling really scared. And a lot of people don't know how to hold space for that or don't even understand, that they need to.
yeah,
So that is a really big thing for children who have that highly sensitive personality and that anxiety.
Yeah. And I too, I'm thinking just of all of my clients too, right? Adults like 30s, 40s, 50s, that a lot of times that's simply what we need is just to be able to have a space that feels safe and you can be able to share how you're feeling. That is so incredibly freaking helpful. And me, right, I'm on the other side, like, no, 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 this is not, we're not fixing, right? We're not trying to fix emotions.
Yeah.
We're just trying to actually teach and allow the person to finally feel them. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Okay, what's the
Yeah.
other? I'm really curious.
Woo!
What is the other one?
Yes. So the other one that I see a lot is unexplained tension in the house on a regular basis
Ooh,
and no one is sharing with the child what is going on.
ah,
So that's like a walking, that could be like a parent who just inherently gives off like a really angry energy, right? Maybe they're passive aggressive. Maybe, and this comes from once again, like never learning how to express their own feelings. Maybe it's a mom who didn't really take good care of herself and felt like she was, on burnout day in, day out and like
mhm,
doing all of these things for her children but really unhappy inside. And so she just kind of gives off this energy of just like resentment and anger. And it's just this feeling of something's being suppressed, and the child can feel it in their parents' nervous system. Or maybe the parents, they're not fighting out loud, they're not yelling at each other, they're not screaming. So it doesn't, that's not trauma, right? There wasn't trauma. My parents never fought. There was just this feeling of tension all of the time, like they hated each other, and I couldn't figure out what was going on.
yeah,
So when there's something going on and we're not explaining it to our children, once again, that goes back to they have to kind of figure it out themselves. So that's the other place that I see, like where people will grow up, be like, I grew up with both my parents in the house. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. This happens a lot, and I'm not, knocking stay-at-home moms at all, but it's hard.
yeah,
And there's a lot of being a stay-at-home mom that, a lot of parents feel like, and moms feel like they can't take care of themselves. They don't have time for themselves, right? And so that's that feeling of, so the child just kind of grows up like something feels off. This creates a
mhm,
lot of anxiety in the child. There's dysregulation because our nervous systems feel when the other person's dysregulated. And so there's unsafety, but I don't know what's unsafe. I don't know why it's unsafe. I don't know if it's me. Does my mom hate me? I don't know if it's something else. Is somebody sick? Maybe somebody gets sick and the child's never explained what's going on. Or
mhm,
somebody has an addiction and the child doesn't know.
yeah,
So something's off. I see these behaviors, but I don't know what's going on. So that's very traumatizing because once again, it's like I have to, as a child, come up with what's going on and make sense of it on my own. There's no space my parents can hold for me for my feelings of what's happening.
yeah. Oh my gosh, that it's so these 2 things so illuminating. That makes so much sense. I think I'm always trying to be, like, cognizant right now as a parent of these things because I think you do, like, being a mom, you feel like you take on so much there, especially working in the home, working outside the home, you feel like you're stretched so thin sometimes and feeling like you don't always have all the capacity, and trying to be mindful too of how that might affect your child, right? If you're not processing things in a healthy way and taking time for yourself and taking care of yourself and like there's so much, I mean, that's like a whole conversation we could have.
It really is,
Oh,
isn't
it
it?
is, but I think too, there's those like, they can seem more subtle, right, these 2 things. I think I've shared this, like, a lot, I've been very open, but I grew up with a parent, my dad, who was very, like, explosive, like, volatile behaviors, unpredictable, not emotionally checked in at all. It was often, like, scary, didn't quite know, right, what mood you were gonna get, what was gonna happen. But I think what you're saying with this one specifically, like, I don't think as a kid I could ever understand, right? Like, what the heck is it? Like, what is going on? And, of course, there was tension between him and I, because I could never connect with him, but between him and my mom, like, just between all of us, right? And I couldn't understand, and of course, that caused so much dysregulation, and then nobody talked about it. Like nobody's going to talk about this craziness that's going on. And so I think it becomes normal. Like it's so normal. And I think I was talking to my best friend about this the other day. I'm like, so we all had so many similarities in the houses in which we grew up in. And I think we all thought it was normal, like to not talk about feelings, to not see our parents really connect, to not have those healthy relationships modeled for us. Like it's just mind blowing now. And I remember walking into therapy like in my early 20s. I was probably 23, 24. And I was like so upset because I was like, why is this still affecting me? Like, why am I still bothered by my parents' relationship, by them getting divorced? And my therapist looked at me and said, like, one of the most helpful things ever, Shannon, it wasn't the divorce that was traumatic. It was everything that came before that that was traumatic. And I was like, what? Because of course, I think as a kid, you're just like, they got divorced. So what? That happens all the time. Like, that's so
Yeah.
normal. And my therapist was like, no, no, no. Like, that can be traumatic, of course, your parents getting divorced. But she was like, all the stuff that you saw as a kid, all of the things that you didn't get as a kid. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, I needed somebody to point that out and to literally just validate that was traumatic. And I mean, I could tell you now, like, yeah, it was. But as a teenager, as a kid, I would have been like, no, I'm not, this isn't trauma. Like, that's crazy talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what you're talking about is so important too, because when you don't recognize it as trauma and you recognize it as normal, then when you're caught in these patterns and these things that are happening and the things that you're pulled towards, right? And you're just like, why do I keep ending up in this same situation? Or why do I have this, for instance, horrible anxiety? Why do I feel like I have to manage everyone's emotions? My childhood was totally normal. My parents got divorced. Who cares, right? But it's like, oh, wait, because that changed the way your body responds to things. That changed your
Yeah.
nervous system. Of course, you were in fight or flight all the time if your dad was going to have to fly off the handle and you never knew when he was going to, you know? And
Yeah.
of course, you're going to feel unsafe if you feel tension, but you cannot explain what's going on because the three things our nervous system needs for safety is context, choice, and connection. And so if we have no context, we're just left to make sense of it on our own. Well, maybe I'm a bad kid. Maybe I'm annoying. Maybe dad hates me, right?
Yeah.
So we internalize so many things.
Yeah, 1,000%, 1,000%. And it sat like I remember hearing that, right? And I was like, yeah, I always thought it was me. Like there was a big problem with me. And then comes the people pleasing. I mean, this there's so much. There's so much. But I want to shift and talk about now, like into your early adult years, into your adult years. Like, how can this then show up in your everyday adult life?
Yes. Yes. So when there is trauma that has occurred that has changed our bodies and it's living in our bodies and it changes the way we respond to things. It changes the way we choose our partners. It changes the way we parent. So when you ask where it shows up everywhere. It shows up in the way we soothe ourselves. It shows up in how we communicate with other people. So I was a passive aggressive communicator for a really long time because I
Same.
learned that if I came, whenever I would come to my mom with an issue I had with her and try to talk with her about it, she would become really, really explosive and get really, really angry at me and scream. And it never led to actual resolve. So, what was it that I learned? Oh, like there is no healthy communication, right? If you tell somebody what's wrong, they're going to get really mad at you, and that could lead to physical or emotional abuse. So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to have conflict. So I would either cut people off right away because also, my dad leaving and that abandonment wound, it was kind of either like, okay, you exit the relationship or you communicate in a way that they're going to take you seriously. So I was either passive aggressive or super aggressive. Like I would let things all fester and like build up this case, against whoever it was I'm going in after that I'm trying to build a healthy relationship with. But I'm also, taking notes on what I'm upset about with them, and then kind of like go into the conflict really aggressively or just drop a little, like, no, I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. I'm
Yeah.
fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. I just have this angry energy that's leaking out of my body. So I think it affects so many different things, but those are the main ways that I see it come up for people is in their relationships, the way that they communicate,
Yeah. Oh,
those
yeah. I'm
types of
like
things.
nodding my head. Yep. It made, when I got into my first like serious relationship, right, as an early adult, I saw all of this come out. Like, didn't know how to communicate,
Mhm. Mhm.
even though it was like a healthy, like, he was so safe, so secure. It was like and you can see
Mhm.
it too, like, why am I acting this way? This is so crazy, like, but it makes sense from the environment that you grew up in.
Mhm.
So I think also too, right, like, there are so many ways that I think it can show up, and gosh, this is like a 2-hour conversation, I feel like,
Mhm.
but I think a lot of people have that experience of it just simply showing up as anxiety, like, so much
Mhm.
wanting so much control,
Mhm.
like, not wanting anything to feel
Mhm.
too big, too scary,
Mhm.
not wanting ever to be outside your comfort zone. I
Mhm.
know this was the way that it showed up for me, for many of my clients, because you experience this unpredictability or neglect or abuse, whatever it is, and you feel like I have to keep myself safe, like I have to protect
Mhm.
and I have to have like safety at all times because I never want to feel the way that I felt when I was a kid.
Absolutely.
So, how do these relationships, like how do the trauma, I should say, as a kid affect and impact our relationship with anxiety as an adult?
Yeah. So I've yet to meet someone who's been through trauma that doesn't struggle with anxiety.
Mhm.
And I do a lot of polyvagal in my work with clients, polyvagal theory, which was was discovered by or created by Stephen Porges, and it's all about the way that our nervous system responds to our different response states. Okay, and so basically when have something traumatic that's happened to us, our nervous system kind of gets stuck in this place of fight or flight. And what Stephen Porges talks about is like in our lives, we're driven by two things: the need to connect and the need to survive. And when we've had childhood trauma, especially when it is from our primary caregivers, we learned that connecting is actually a threat to our survival.
Mhm.
And in polyvagal theory, the ventral vagal response state is the state where we feel safely connected. And in that state, we are fully embodied. We are curious, creative, not necessarily calm. Like we're able to acknowledge our distress. We're able to reach out for support, right? So I think of that like ventral vagal space, somebody who grew up with primary caregivers who were attuned to them and who learned safety and connection were we're okay and we're safe and we're not a threat to their survival. And so when we have that trauma take place, that system kind of goes offline and
Mhm.
we end up getting stuck in fight or flight. And then also freeze and dorsal vagal, which is the last one, which is just that system shut down where we just feel exhausted and fatigued. So a lot of people I have, they'll feel really, really anxious and they'll be really like mobilized. And then they'll just also be like, I can't do anything. Like, and they'll switch between those two modes. And they're finding very little space in that ventral vagal space, which is that safety and connection, because they've learned that's not safe for them. So they're always kind of in this protective mode and they're always in this fight or flight space. So that leads to a lot of the anxiety, just that feeling of I can't trust anyone or I can't be vulnerable with anyone or feeling safe doesn't feel safe for me. So when things are safe, when things are secure, when things are calm, that actually feels unfamiliar. And that makes my body feel unfamiliar and that feels unsafe for my body. So it's almost like they feel like they can't be in a safe space or in a safe relationship. And when they are in that safe place or that safe relationship. Their anxiety spikes up. Like, I need to be watching. Like, you can't let your guard down. Something bad's going to come in. This is wrong. This isn't the way things are supposed to be. So I think it's just, it changes our nervous system, and it really makes us not familiar with that safety and connection.
Yeah. Oh, I think I know you've probably seen this quite a bit, right, in the work that you've done, that people do finally get into a relationship that is healthy, where they are secure, and there's so much anxiety, and they're like, "What the heck is happening? Like, this is a good relationship. Like, I'm finally making a good choice."
Mhm.
My body is like, "Oh, we're gonna give you a ton of anxiety." It's like, "What?
Mhm.
Oh, thank you."
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you might be drawn to do something that's going to mess that relationship up or
Yeah.
make it chaotic. So what my thing was like, okay, I'm going to like stir up conflict, because when things were safe, I would have this a little bit of like a pit in my stomach. Like, I'm not prepared. Like, this could be taken away from me. So what am I going to do? I'm going to like test it. I'm going to stir up conflict. I'm going to make something where there is nothing. And so I see that in a lot of my clients too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So when you say, because I think this eh, is a little bit, people can be like, what? And it doesn't always sound great, right? When you say, if you experience childhood trauma and anxiety starts really showing up, right? You kind of are stuck in this fight or flight. That can almost feel like, oh God, like, what does that mean? Like, then what do I do? Like, how is this fixable? Like, what am I going to do to get myself out of this? Because I think a lot of a common experience, right, is they'll see the anxiety gets better sometimes, and then it will really spike, and they're on, weeks or months of a lot of anxiety, and then it kind of comes down again, and they're like, oh, okay, no, I'm good, I'm actually fine, and then it comes back up again. So it's like, I what is happening? Like, how do I ever make it so that I'm not riding these waves? Can you explain a little bit of that? Because I think when you say, like, as an adult being stuck in fight or flight stemming from your childhood, that can feel really, like, uncomfortable to hear.
Yeah, thanks for naming that, because that was a big thing for me too. When I first started diving into this, one of the things that would trigger me a lot actually was when people would say, I had, just become a mom, your nervous system is actually dysregulating your child's nervous system, right? Or
Oh,
you're
God.
stressed, your child can feel that. So I just then all of a sudden just went down even more of a spiral. Like, then everything's hopeless, because if it's all based on what I'm feeling inside, I'm a wreck inside.
Yep.
So now there's nothing I can do to help this child that I'm parenting. And so I think that that is so important to pay attention to, because if it does feel overwhelming, it's very easy to go into that shutdown mode of just, what's the point? This happened to me when I was a child. Now my nervous system's stuck in fight or flight. And so there's really nothing I can do about it. And it can feel, or it can just feel like there's so much that I have to do to heal from it,
Yeah.
that it just all feels like too much. Because I'm also already exhausted, because I've been in fight or flight for the last 20 years. And,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
I don't wanna go back to my childhood. I think that was, for me, part of it, right, too, going into therapy, like, absolutely not, no thank you. Like, I lived through that for years, like, and I think a lot of people have those same feelings of, like, "I am not going back into all that." Like, so, I wanna see what you think, because of course, my brain's going to the place of, like, do we have to go back there? Like, do we have to do that in order to get out of this fight or flight?
yeah. And so yeah, that's a large part of what I do with clients. And this is what's different about me than a lot of other therapists. And that's different about someone who's working through the lens of polyvagal theory, is that when they first are coming in and they're struggling with things like anxiety, and they're trauma survivors, or maybe I don't even know that. Maybe they're just like, day in, day out, I feel so much anxiety. I don't even want to leave my house.
Mhm.
I'm isolating myself from people, right? I'm immediately tuning into what's going on in their nervous system. Okay. They're in fight or flight, they're cycling in fight or flight and dorsal. And so what do we need to do? Do we need to sit and talk about everything that's going wrong in their life and zero in on this anxiety? Actually, no. That's not super helpful. So, what I want to do for them right away is introduce them to the different response states. So, I'm just going through the autonomic ladder, and I'm just explaining to them. I feel like I'm always like tongue twisted on that, but I'm explaining to them, like, here is what ventral vagal looks like. Here's what we're driven by: the need to survive and the need to connect. Okay. So here's what you're going to feel like in ventral vagal. And I just go explaining that. Like, your body is going to feel relaxed. You're going to be open minded. You're going to be curious. You're going to have compassion. You're going to feel connected. You're going to feel understood. You're going to feel seen. And then we're going to talk about, so I want you to think back, and I want you to think about a time in your life where you felt this way. You felt in this ventral vagal space. And sometimes it's really hard for clients to think about. Sometimes I'm like, well, why don't we just think about 30 seconds maybe? When's the time you felt like this just for a split second? What were you doing? Who were you with? You know? And usually clients will come up with they call in polyvagal theory a landmark memory. And so now we know this ventral vagal space. So I have them kind of go there. I use bilateral stimulation a lot, which is just you can do butterfly tap. You
Yeah.
could use these tappers that I use for EMDR. And I don't know if you've ever done EMDR therapy. Okay, you have.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, so they vibrate back and forth. And so you just go in and you feel the felt sense in your body of what this ventral vagal space looks like. And then oftentimes I'll be like, okay, go back into that memory. Think about that memory. What does your body feel like? So they're recognizing their felt sense. What emotions are you having? And I'll pull out the emotions wheel and they'll name off their emotions. And this is all something that was created by Deb Dana in polyvagal theory for therapy. And then it's like, okay, finish this sentence with the first thing that comes to mind. I am blank. The world is blank. Okay. So I start getting them very familiar with the ventral vagal space. And then I really focus on strengthening that ventral vagal space. So I introduced to them glimmers, which is another polyvagal theory thing. Like, go out and name 3 glimmers that you have today or each day this week, and just jot them down. And then they come back in. Let's start with what were some of your glimmers? So they're already starting the session. I noticed this. I noticed when I had this conversation and I was able to actually be vulnerable, and then there was space held for that.
And
Um,
and, like, because people might be like, "What the hell are glimmers?" Those are, like, moments, right, where you feel joy,
yes.
right? Like, "Ooh."
Yeah. Like
Okay.
micro moments. So like the smallest thing, like I woke up and I heard birds chirping outside of my window and I like noticed it. And it actually felt sense in my body, a little bit of that like safety and connection.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'll even like have my clients make a playlist that gets them into like that ventral vagal space.
Mhm.
Think about hobbies that you could do, or, a lot of people who are artists right here, this is like their creative space. And when they're painting, they feel like that safety in their body. And so it's all about just strengthening that space first before we even go into the trauma or anything like that. But more about building a capacity in your nervous system to be able to handle safety, to
Mhm.
handle joy, and to recognize it again, to be like, okay, this feels unsafe if I'm here for a long time. And that's okay. We're not trying to get rid of the anxiety. That's the other thing I always tell my clients. Like, we're not trying to get rid of this.
Yeah.
We're just also adding in a little bit of extra something, right?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I think, right, like, we have to start with education, right? It's important to have a better understanding, right, of what's going on and why and how you might be approaching it. And I think, like, I love how you said building capacity to handle safety, because I think a lot of people, right, are not walking around experiencing a ton of anxiety, feeling a whole ton of safety. You're like
Yeah.
walking around feeling a whole ton of threat and discomfort and not so good stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, what else?
Yeah. So then let's switch over. So we're going to shift a little bit from polyvagal theory and we're going to switch to EMDR resourcing, which is before we even get into what the processing part of EMDR, we're building what my EMDR coach said when I was going through my training, building the adaptive floor. So we're like laying the groundwork to be able to then open to really have for the body to have the capacity to process through the hard traumatizing
Mm,
memories.
mhm,
Which in EMDR, which is the primary way that I use that I have clients process their trauma in is not necessarily talking through the whole entire traumatic event, but rather your brain is kind of doing the thing when you're holding the tappers. And then you just say one or two sentences about what is happening in this memory, this core wound, this core traumatic event that we are processing. So there is a part of going back into it. But if you know, you had asked about clients that don't even want to go back there, I would just say that, like, I don't want to go back there right now. And there's exercises in EMDR that's like, we can leave this in this container, or we can put this in the hallway. And you know what? You don't even have to, if your brain goes there, let's pause on that and put it in the container or put it in the hallway. And then when you're feeling ready, like, we can tap into that, but very, very slowly. So first, we're really laying the groundwork of building this adaptive floor. And in EMDR, what we're doing is we're teaching techniques. So for emotional regulation.
Yeah.
So we're doing the bilateral tapping. We're creating the inner safe place, which is just kind of that visualization of closing your eyes. Where's a place that you have seen or been to that felt really, really safe? And what's
Mhm.
5 things that you can see there? What's, 4 things you can touch? What's 3 things you can smell? 2 things you can taste? Or no, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And kind of putting your body in this safe place, being like, what sensations do you recognize in your body? So we're really helping them find this felt sense of safety. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, by allowing you to feel, right? Like, I
Yeah.
remember when I did EMDR, I didn't do it like for trauma necessarily. It was actually more recently within the past couple of years that I did it for like a lot of stress and overwhelm because of something unrelated to anxiety that I had going on, but I found it incredibly helpful in actually letting myself be with the feelings because I am not great, like many of us, at allowing yourself to be with what's going on. You're trying to fix, get rid of all the things, right, that are
Mhm.
adding to the stress and overwhelm.
Mhm.
But I thought that it was so cool because it looked so different probably from how it looks when other people do EMDR. Like it was very tailored to me and what I was going through. And like, I thought it was super cool. And I was like, I don't want to, no, I don't want to do this really. And my therapist was like, okay, just let me know, like, if you want to. And finally I was like, okay, let's try it. I'm going to be open-minded. And I really, really enjoyed it. So I would say, right, be open-minded. And like you're saying, Amber, you don't have to go there right off the bat. This isn't about like take you back to your childhood. We're going to talk about all of it. We're going to like make you re-traumatized, right? And go through all this again. There's such a healthy approach with all of it. But
Mhm.
I think there is so much in this work of like allowing yourself to process feelings because what's coming up now is because of stuff that happened then. And it's not necessarily going back to like all that stuff and rehashing all of it, but letting yourself feel what's coming up now in the adulthood time. Like that's the
Absolutely.
thing that I love about it.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I love that you brought up the emotional suppression part because a lot of times when I have clients that are really, really anxious, what I'm really curious about, what emotion are you suppressing?
Mhm.
What emotions are you not allowing yourself to feel? I'm totally thinking about Inside Out 2 right now,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
what memories are you really just like, I can't think about this. I cannot let myself go there. So, in some ways, anxiety is protecting you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good protector, but it feels like it's trying to kill you at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And so being able to build the capacity again, right? Because when we've suppressed a lot of emotion or when we've been taught in childhood, this emotion is not safe. You can't just go right in and be like, feel your feelings, feel it
Yeah.
to, feel it to heal it. And let's just feel it all because that's actually really unsafe for your body. And it's going to send you into like a panic attack or something, right? So it's just about slowly increasing capacity to feel those feelings and being able to sit with yourself in those feelings and comfort, that child inside of you that had learned so long ago, oh, it's actually not safe to show this.
Mhm. Oh, Dang, Amber, I wish we had so much more time. This has been so good. And I'm already thinking like I want to have you back on to talk about emotionally immature parents because I think like that would be such a good conversation and help with this conversation too. And I know you talk about that. So that we'll schedule that.
For
Um,
sure. I would love to do that. That would be
oh,
fun.
it's
And well,
like
hard, but
yeah, fun, hard, messy, but good and helpful too. So
exactly.
if people want to find and connect with you and get some support from you, where can they find you?
Yes. So my website is www.theintegrativetraumatherapist.com. And you can email me from that website. I also have some freebies on there for people where I go into, in fact, I have a guide that goes a lot more in depth about these exercises that you can do, and it's completely free. So you can sign up for that, and it's really, really helpful. And then I'm on Instagram as integrative trauma therapist. And I have content creation that I do. And it's a mixture of things, but usually always related to trauma in some way.
Awesome. Well, we'll include all of that. And just thank you so much. This has been such a helpful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of A Healthy Push. If you want more, head on over to ahealthypush.com for the show notes and lots more tips, tools, and inspiration that will support your recovery. And if you're hoping for me to cover a certain topic, be sure to join my Instagram community at A Healthy Push and let me know in the comments what you want to hear next.